Namaste, my dear friends. Good afternoon, good afternoon. So, let's continue the discussion about progressive apps. Let's not start, but continue. And in my session, we'll answer how do we do them. And I hope that you already convinced to do progressive apps, for example, by the session of Marta. Great session. Marta, give a round of applause to Marta. So yes, you saved my time a lot. I don't need to convince people. And actually, India is a country where PWA revolution happened. And there are only few countries where so great and big and serious businesses are in production using progressive apps. Maybe you can tell me what are the best examples from your country of web apps which we call progressive. Yes, please. Flipkart, more? So I can say Flipkart, Ola, Book My Show, Swiggy, and lots more. And good idea. And I believe after this conference there will be way more progressive apps in production. Who am I? I'm Maxim. I came to you from Norway just a few hours ago, this morning, and a few hours ago I was in a very snowy and cold place. Now I'm in very warm environment, warm like in all senses, right? It's summer and I feel your great mood and power, and thank you very much. This is my Twitter, WebMaxRU. This could be useful for you because I will post the link to this slide. This is online version of this slide deck. And actually what I post on my Twitter, mainly news about progressive apps, news about Angular, their combination, news about web platform, so everything for web front-end developers. And I run NG Vikings conference. This is why I know how much efforts it takes to organize event like this. So let's please give a round of applause to organizers and volunteers. And of course, sponsors. My great thanks go to DJ organizer and Infragistics company. They helped me a lot to solve all these organizational issues. Okay, but what is PWA at all? Very short, because I believe you all know, so just to refresh our memories and maybe give this, why it goes automatically? Okay, Mikhail, now I understand what you meant by be careful with back button. Okay, so this is not a framework, not a library, right? This is just a way of thinking to build web applications the way they work as good as web platform can, as good as modern web browsers can. Of course, we have to use all the latest and greatest APIs, but as a result, we deliver great user experience. So after all, we build our apps for our users, clients, customers. This is good for them. What's good for us is these applications work everywhere. Well, this is quite strong definition, right? Everywhere. But nowadays, progressive apps run as native apps, definitely in all evergreen browsers. This is native environment for them. Then in lots of operating systems, and you don't need any wrapper for lots of use cases. So it's pure JavaScript running on this or that operating system, like totally native application. On my PWA sessions, I always give the latest news and just some of the latest additions to this topic. So first, Specification is under development to give an access to file system, and of course it opens doors for lots of new types of web applications when you can physically open files from your file system. Next, great news from Apple, and like for quite a long time Apple was showstopper in this context, because it was totally unclear, will they go for service worker and all related APIs at all? They go, and the process is going up and down, but the latest additions to iOS 12.2 beta says that yes, something is going on in Apple. This is very, very difficult to know what's going on inside. It's quite secret company. But and they don't call progressive web apps, so don't expect to see in some release notes or documentation something like this. They call this websites saved to home screen. So WSH is a new definition invented by me. So PWA everywhere and WSH in Apple. Let's live with this. And another great specification is under development, allowing us to set up notification triggers. What's this all about? It's just a registration of some event which should happen in the future. For now, only like time events are available. Literally, you can like build your own alarm clock. But soon there will be other triggers. For example, I don't know, geofence trigger when you leave this or that area, and lots of more. Before it was available to trigger something when your application is not running only by sending push notification, but you have to be connected, and sometimes it's not very reliable. Now the new times are coming. This is really, really cool. What about Angular? So we are at Angular conference after all, and Angular loves progressive web apps for a long time, as basically any modern framework. And there are lots of different options and ways to build progressive web app for your I don't know, customer, boss, for your side project. And we are here today to understand what will work better for us, for this or that case. When we are talking about progressive web apps in terms of development, in most cases we mean something around service workers API. And for today, this will be our main point of interest. After all, this is like main working force of all PWA concepts. So it's brains and heart and like core of PWA idea. And we can write it manually. It's JavaScript code after all. Next, we can use solution from Angular team called Angular Service Worker, or NGSW in short. Or we can go for one of other automation libraries available on market. I believe you heard these names, SW Precache, and its successor called Workbox. So basically we focus our efforts today on NGSW, Angular Service Worker, and Workbox. But before we dive deep into how to create, let's define some frame. What exactly do we want to create? And let's start from the very simple, not very simple, but simplest app we can even call a progressive web app. So what is this about? You'll find lots of different checklists on the internet, like what differs regular web application or regular website from progressive. I compiled some main points for you. So first, to call something an application at all, we have to at least provide the name for this application, right? Name and set of icons. It's still very important to give our user feeling that this is not just set of JavaScript files, HTML files, CSS files, but something that we can wrap up into concept called application. Next, this application should be available offline. And one of possible architectures called application shell, and this will be our point of interest for today. Two other points, I believe we create our applications like this, like they are all fast, responsive, and served by HTTPS by default, right? So it's not directly related to PWA. This is just a good manner for today's web. Nothing to add here. So the point requiring the most, say, programming and coding stuff is, of course, application shell, and let's explore this concept. Let's virtually architect what do we need from application shell to call it application shell, right? So first, we have to understand which files, which resources, which assets, you name it, we really need. And of course, the shorter list, the smaller number of resources we need, the better, because this is application shell, this is UI of our app, right? And the faster it loads, the better perception it will have. Then we have to think about versioning, and we don't want to cache something for forever, because our application is developing, it's growing, we fix error bugs. The good way to deal with this is just to calculate hash sums for each of the resource. Then, on the first load, we put all these assets we just defined to some form of cache. And this is very special cache we luckily have in all evergreen browsers, all modern browsers, called cache storage. Don't mess up with regular HTTP cache, please, like totally different entities. And then we just serve this application shell from this storage. So basically, this is how all offline magic works. We serve it not from the network, but from this storage. And we serve this from storage in both cases, both for offline, which is obvious, we have only one option, right? And online. But why do we go to this cache even when we know exactly that we are connected? For the speed of loading. Because we don't need to go to the network at all, right? If we have something pre-cached, right? I love the saying about the best HTTP request is the one which was never performed. And, back to versioning. Yes, our application will definitely have a new version and new version and new version. And if this, for example, I don't know, main JavaScript bundle was updated, of course we have to have some mechanism to grab this updated version and update this corresponding resource in cache. Then on next load, on n+1 load in my context, we can serve this. But the problem is that on the first load after update, we still got the old one, right? Because we remember that we immediately serve from cache, not from network. Maybe this is really good idea at this time point to show some kind of message. I bet you all have visited some websites with this, I don't know, pop-up, snack bar, toast, popping up saying, this website or this web app was updated. Do you want to reload this? So who have seen messages like this? Yes, this is kind of trade-off or compromise of progressive web apps. For me, it breaks freshness of the web, but as a compromise, we have pros and cons, and we just have to deal with this. So we can split all the operations into three groups. First, something that we do on the build time. So we get the list, we do this calculation, so it obviously can be performed during building of our application. Next big group is what's happening during real runtime, and it's not a secret that it's exactly service worker file who is responsible for all these operations with network, with cache, with updates, and so on and so on. And number 3 is about giving this message. It's about giving like visual hint to our user that something was updated. Number 3, this is not an obligatory part of this PWA checklist, but still I think it's so important for user experience that we definitely have to go to explore how to implement this mechanism. Let's start. Just a super quick dive into service worker. So I mentioned this many times. It's a JavaScript code. JavaScript code fully based on some kind of event. So if we can imagine our website and the service worker as JavaScript files living inside the browser or operating system if they were installed, then service worker intercepts all the events outgoing from our app, plus it catches events from the cloud. And who can tell me what does this blue arrow from cloud means? What kind of events can service worker get at the moment from the cloud, not dependent on web app at all? Push, exactly. It's about push. So we can think about our web application as a house, and the service worker is a guard, but guard with some sort of fun, because for example, it can say that all outgoing requests from our app will go to the network as is. Totally fine. We can code it. Or we can say all outgoing requests from our app will return animated GIF with kitten. That's also very possible, and it's totally up to us. If we wish to do like this, we will do it. And it's totally transparent for our application, and our application will never know was this response returned by service worker or it's something real on the network. So it's the real power. And as I mentioned, it's all based on some kind of events, and like very schematical idea. We have event install, and on this event in our service worker, this is service worker code, we put some responses we got from the network to cache. Another event called activate, and we do some spring cleaning after previous versions of service worker. So it sounds very simple, but in real life we have to deal with lots of edge cases and lots of details of HTTP protocol implementation, lots of networking, providing some kind of fallbacks, and it's really challenging to write, say, production-ready code, taking into account all these edge cases, plus optimal at the same time. Just about optimal. Most likely, we do not update all the files, all the assets in our application shell, right? So in most cases, this is 1 or 2 files, something like this. So it's not a very good idea to grab from the network the whole version of our application, put into cache, and wipe the old version. So of course, it's better to pick file by file, and we have to implement it ourselves. Next, it was about caching. Then on serving, again, it's service worker. Again, it's like very schematic for you just to understand the complexity. We can say for resources served from this URL, we go for this or that rule, and for resources served from, for example, our API endpoint, we implement this logic. For resources served from third-party CDN, we go for totally different logic. So after all, what we end up with in the real-world application, again, lots of things to care about, and we implement our version of routing after all. We most likely have to implement some networking strategies, provide fallbacks for all the cases. Like if we try to reach network first and the network is not available, we go to grab something from cache, and vice versa. At the same time, if something was updated, we have to update it in our cache. So lots of this back and forth ping pong. Maybe it's not very complex algorithmically, but it's quite challenging to test, and HTTP protocol is not the simplest one. So yes, you will spend some time if you go to implement it manually. It's doable, and it will make you a better programmer, and it will make you learn HTTP to every single detail, but it will take your time. So this is maybe not something you want to spend your main time. If your boss just told you, I just need PWA, so what to do? What do we have in this manual mode? It's full power, so we can implement everything what we want, but it comes with great responsibility. Luckily, we have tools, and tools help us with lots of this challenge. So these 3 points, they are related mainly to pretty much every helper library, helper module we use. So it's just helper, and if you wish to be a better developer, you will go to the source of this tool if you inspired by how this is. How great this library, you go to explore how it's implemented. Most of these helpers are open source, so yeah, it also makes you a better developer at the same time. What's especially related to PWA and service worker in particular, the last 2 points. So yes, it's still a live standard, and if you try to, I don't know, go too deep, sometimes there are breaking changes. Like if you implement something not very well documented, you may end up with not just a progressive web app, but with no app at all, with blank screen when someone types your superwebsite.com. That happened, and of course you have to rely on creators of this and that tool at the same time, right? So they have to follow everything, and lots of edge cases, as I already mentioned. So we have 2 helpers to explore today, which are Angular Service Worker and Workbox. All the code and ideas related to Angular Service Worker will be on the blue background, about Workbox on brown background. Just to check, what do we have here on the blue background? NGSW. Yes, NGSW, or Angular Service Worker. And it's all about automation on all the steps. So we use schematics to scaffold everything. We use CLI to build everything. And we use Angular Service Worker itself for the runtime. It's super easy to start with. Basically, it's just one liner of schematics called ng-add, Angular PWA, and lots of magic happens. We will not go through all these points. This is just to show you that schematics is cool. And these points are quite boring to implement manually. Again, we can do everything without schematics. We have to create some files, update some files, change some configuration. So schematics is to our salvation. Then build, Angular CLI. Don't forget to run production build. By default, it runs only in that mode, and there is a condition in your app module that you can use it only there. You will notice some new files after you run this build in your dist folder. Let me scroll to this. Yes, so ngSW.json. This is a configuration file for Angular Service Worker. And Service Worker itself, you remember the one with all these events, we don't have to write manual anymore, called ngSW worker. So after you run ng-build production mode, you will see these files. If we go closer to look at this manifest file, we will see that actually it's exactly what we need, what we architected. It's a list of resources plus their hash sums. Nice. How do we exactly say to Angular Service Worker which files to pick for our application shell? So first, it does its best to predict what could be the application files, but we can always fine-tune this. There is ngSW-config.json, and it's quite simple to say which exactly files do we want to have as our resources. So this is default or smart default. So we take fav icon, we take index.html, all CSS, all JavaScript. You are totally fine to add more resources or reduce this number. Good. Now we can go and test this app. Is this offline or not? We try this and we fail. Maybe we forgot to use production mode. We fail again. The problem is Angular Service Worker is not working good with ng-serve command. They are, say, architecturally incompatible at the time. So ng-serve, it's too smart for all these optimizations. So Angular Service Worker goes a bit crazy when it's served from the memory, but it's not a big problem for us because you have lots of different opportunities to run development server locally. Basically, it could be any local web server which is working with HTML5 navigation. I just listed some of the very good options for you. What's next? After all, if we started some web server, we go to check, and we can even put offline mode. Our application will still work, and that's cool. It looks like we just gave offline Dino some rest, so this nice creature can go to have some fun instead of serving lots of websites, web pages with wording the server is not available. Now it's available. Okay, let's jump straight to other library, and you tell me the name. Workbox. Yes, you are not sleeping. This is very good. Workbox. It's a different approach. So first, this is network tasks automation library for progressive web apps. And what's really cool, lots of points. First, it contains a nice set of features going out of the box. I just listed some of them. Next, we still have full control on the code of Service Worker. So you remember, in case of ng-sw, you don't touch Service Worker at all. Angular team created it for you, and you can only configure this. Configure, say, to some extent. In case of Workbox, if you go for one of the modes, you still write your own Service Worker JS or SW.js or you name it yourself, and you just inject some pieces of functionality you need, and this is really cool. And another super cool option, Workbox is framework agnostic, so you can easily expand your experience you got on Angular project to your React project, to your Vue project, to your Vanilla.js project. So it's not bound to any specific framework at all. Okay, so there are three main working modes, and for Angular development, I would recommend to go for node module, special node module called Workbox build. So you just have to install this module. It's on use only during development, on build time, so we can easily, safely put it into developer dependencies. And let's go. As every Node module, we have to write some Node script. But the good fact is Node.js script, this is JavaScript, right? So we know JavaScript. The simplest way for Workbox to be able to build something good for you is just something like this. We use a method called inject manifest from this library we just installed. We provide some configuration, and we actually run this inject manifest. So what's going on exactly? Let's have a look at what exactly do we inject? We inject the list like this, and you see that it looks very close to what generated by Angular CLI in case of Angular Service Worker, right? So the same list of resources and their hashes, a bit different format, but the idea is totally the same. And configuration, again, we provided quite similar way. It's like difference in syntax, no more. Glob patterns, we list resources we want to have as our application shell to be pre-cached. But there is one important difference. We also provide SW source, and this is exactly source of our own service worker, and this is exactly where we inject this manifest. So let's have a look at the simplest view of our own service worker in that case. So yes, it's our file. We keep control on this. I put it into source folder. First, it imports Workbox library itself, and then it uses this pre-cache and route method with some empty array. So this is like source looking like, and on this inject manifest, we inject this manifest you've seen on the previous slide exactly here. So this is just boring file operation. Workbox build goes through this list of resources, creates this list, calculates hash, and opens this file, and like just physically injects it here. So we have point number 1 on build step covered by this inject manifest, and we have point number 2 about serving all this stuff, updating all this stuff, managing cache, checking versions, doing fallbacks, fully here in only one method called pre-cache and route. So wow, we are fully covered here. The last and basically like the only thing we have to change in our app configuration is to add this script, Node script, to run after our production build. And that's it. We'll get the same behavior, same offline available website. Nice. So we can list pros and cons, not cons, only pros of these two approaches. And GSW, super simple to start. The main one, and for me, the main one in Workbox is having full control on our service worker. Next, point number 3. You remember, we're still not covered by this update flow. And just to remind you how that about this say logical bug or compromise, when we have version 1 and 1, it's all okay, right? So we deployed version something, and we see exactly this one. Then we fixed something, we updated the version. If we hit refresh, we'll still see version number 1. I explained why that happened, because it gets everything from cache. On the second load, if we implemented everything correctly, and if we use NGSW or Workbox, or if we wrote our correct service worker ourselves, you will still see version 2. This is good. But at this point, it's really good to show message, something like this, like new version is available. So just to give some visual hint to our users. And they can decide, do they go to refresh or not, if they, I don't know, fill some long form. It's possible to do this refresh forcibly, like, but it's even worse user experience. Just imagine that you started to fill some big form, and then your service worker downloaded updated resource, and something updated. Let's refresh this. Pff, all disappeared. Not good. Don't go for this. And And GSW, there is a special service called SW update. We use it totally Angular way. So we import, we dependency inject this, and we listen to observable called available. So if something is happening, we can show this confirmation. In my example, this is simple JavaScript confirmation. Maybe you might want to use something from your UI library to have it more visually proper. And we are fully covered with service point number 3. Also, in NGSW, it's not like very oftenly used function. We can even provide description for what exactly was updated. There is optional property called app data, and it's like free-form JavaScript object. So what we pass here, we can read in this observable. So then we can give not just something was updated, but what exactly was updated. That's cool. Workbox. We have at least 2 options, right? First, this is about special plugin going out of the box. Another one-liner, we just provide the name of channel we want to use to listen in our application, and inside our app, we just listen to this broadcast channel API channel. It's part of JavaScript standard, and if something happened there, we just show this option. Option number 2, and here we have to look at how do we register service worker. Because in case of NGSW, we are fully covered. We don't have to add any code to our app at all to, say, associate our application and this service worker. It's a bit different in case of Workbox. So first, I speculated a bit. So on the build step, it was not enough. So we just built service worker, but it's still like separate file, right? We have to register this service worker against our app. And this is something we have to perform manually. The simplest and the most naive code is something like this. We, even in this naive form, I still emphasize the need of doing feature detection. So we check if service worker is available at this browser at all, not to populate our log with lots of red lines. And if yes, we just register this. Good, but not perfect. Let's define some requirements we would like to have for, say, our dream registration of service worker. First, feature detection. This is totally must-have. Then, delay registration to the for as long as possible, not to compete with the main thread for network, for processor time. PWA is about progressive enhancement, so it should not. It should only improve your application if possible, but not to vice versa, right? And then we can hook into some lifecycle events of service worker to understand if it was updated or not. Why? Because first, most likely, if we updated our service worker file, it's already a new version of our application. So it's already a signal for us to show this message, right? Plus, if any bundle or resource of our app was updated, it means that this injected manifest has different hash sum, and it again affects service worker JavaScript file. So again, another trigger for us to update. To not dive deep into lifecycle events of service worker like straight ahead, if I still recommend you to learn this, but if you want to have this feature right here, right now, I recommend you to use another small library called register service worker, which actually gives you nice hook for this lifecycle event. So it looks very similar to what we use in, say, vanilla JavaScript registration, but we have callback called updated, where we can put this message about something was updated. And looking at the GitHub handle of this of creator of this library, who can tell me who is creator of this really small but useful helper? He's a well-known guy in the world of frameworks. Just have a look at this handle. YYX something, something, something. Maybe it looks familiar. Okay, this is Evan View, creator of Vue.js. And basically, this library is used in Vue.js default PWA plugin. Okay, so we can list what we learned here. In Angular, we use Angular way to provide this functionality. In Workbox, we have at least 2 options. Why do I say about at least 2? Because most likely next week, we'll have option number 3, which will be totally native one for Workbox. So we don't have to install this small helper. We don't have to dig into lifecycle events manually. There will be a new component of Workbox called Workbox Window, which will cover you on this registration of service worker and all those lifecycle events. So I believe this will happen very, very soon. Now it's a release candidate 3 and we test everything, so it works pretty good. Really quick about runtime. So we just say architected and discussed about how we pre-cache and serve and maintain lifecycle and versions of application shell. But I believe 99% of web applications or websites, they are not only about serving something and nothing else. They work with some APIs, like internal or external. Yes, they perform some HTTP calls, and these HTTP calls, their responses can also be optimized in terms of pre-caching and caching. Okay, so what do we have in Angular Service Worker? We have some pre-configured strategies. And by saying some, I mean we have 2 strategies here, like 2 main strategies included. We provide them in the configuration file, approximately like the same as we provide resources for app shell, but in that sense, most likely we go for some not local files, but and not wildcards so often, but some more predefined stuff. And yes, there are 2 main strategies called freshness and performance, meaning correspondingly network first. This is freshness, so we're trying to be as fresh as possible. And this is why I have breaking news as example of API we would like to use the strategy for. Or another called performance. This is, say, way more conservative, for example, for archives of something that we can logically think that if we downloaded this JSON or XML or something once, and this is our news, for example, we run news website and these are news from 80s, most likely they will not be updated anymore, so we can safely save it in cache and serve them later. But still, we can do some fine-tuning by the number of resources cached and for example, maximum time we want to cache it. So even for very conservative strategy, we can say, okay, 1 year is enough, then we will recheck. Good. Another useful hint for using Angular Service Worker is giving versioning. It's also not very often used and very useful. This is happening when, for example, you change format of your APIs and you a bit confused what will happen. So now my web application is ready to, say, parse this JSON when I, for example, wrap everything into a node called result. But before that, I had the API which served everything not wrapped, and it might be in cache. And then if my web app will try to parse this, it will fail if I didn't provide all like this try catch and versioning. Angular team is having solution here. Just provide optional field called version, which is integer. And if you change this, for example, if you increment this, Angular Service Worker will ignore all its pre-cached and we'll try to re-download all the fresh. So it might be very useful. So we change from 1 to 2. Workbox, same idea. We provide some URLs, some patterns, some like in form of regex, for example, and some strategies. Here, this is network first, which is analog of freshness in Angular Service Worker, and we can extend the logic by injecting our own plugins or built-in plugins to get this configuration fully customizable if we are unhappy with some options we have now. Good, so now we are ready to list pros and cons for that point also. Angular Service Worker, easy to use, but we are very limited to this configuration. On the other hand, Workbox gives us full power, so it's a very flexible configuration. Plus, if we are not happy with this configuration, we can write our own code to process this configuration. Nice, and our last point for today, dedicated to push notifications, which are unfortunately not available on iOS yet, but still they work perfectly on your Android devices, on your desktop devices. So I really recommend you to use this, but not overuse this. Angular Service Worker, same idea as with SW Update, special service called SW Push, and it actually gives us some syntax sugar over the native subscription for push messages. So it's a method called request subscription where we provide the ID we need. So this is just a simple helper, and if you ever try to set up push notifications, you know that there are two totally separate in time and in code processes. First is registration for push notifications when the user is seeing this sometimes annoying native dialog in the browser. Do you like to receive notifications from here? So subscribed, yes. And another part is sending notification itself. And in Angular Service Worker, we are fully automated here. And by the way, I believe push notifications is still totally not documented on Angular IO. I didn't check today, but yes, for some reason this is working perfectly, but still not documented. I have to double check. On the sending, so first sending is always going from our backend, and we just have to follow some simple convention. We have to wrap notification payload into field called notification, and this is the only convention we have to use to get Angular Service Worker understand everything and show notifications for us, so we don't have to write any line of the code. Workbox. Workbox, if you remember, I call this as a network tasks automation library for PWA. So it actually knows nothing about push messages with its own pros and cons. So in case of Angular Service Worker, it's code free, but we are very limited. So basically, we can just subscribe and show some message. So we cannot handle any custom logic inside what to do, for example, do after we got this event and before sending actual notification. The logic can be very custom. Angular Service Worker allows only one way to send payload straight from server from the very first call. Workbox, since it exposes nothing about push, we have to use another feature of Workbox, and I explained we have to use our own service worker code, right? And in our own service worker, we write a handler for push event. It's like another event in addition to install, activate, fetch, lots of others. So we have to just write JavaScript code manually, but we can implement any logic we want here. Plus, we can implement logic for what's happening on click over notification. And notification can have, for example, set of actions. So we can define what's going on after each action. Also, what's going on when we close notification. This Trigger is also available in Service Worker API, and we are free to provide our own code. So pros and cons here are very clear. In JSW, we are fully covered by the functionality of library itself. Notifications clicks, they in production, but in very, very limited form. We will not go into details. Workbox, all the power. So it's exactly the case when we have full flexibility and full responsibility, only at this point. Let's sum up after all. JSW. Easy to start, easy to configure. If we ever need to write some line of code, it's Angular style of writing code, like dependency injection, observables, all we love, I'd say. So we can tell that add, configure, and get what's included exactly. No more, no less. Workbox, totally different. So first, use it everywhere. Great set of built-in plugins. Absolutely flexible configuration. If you are not happy with configuration, you can write your plugins, and full power of your own service worker if you go for this node module option. So set up, configure, code if needed, and get exactly what you want. Before I go off from the stage, I recommend you to go to this URL, and this is Slack team I manage. Slack team is open, dedicated to progressive web apps. All your questions, all your feedback, all your concerns. So I believe we are more than 100 today, so let's make it 2,000 plus. And we have folks from all main browsers, libraries, folks from Workbox are there. On that, thank you very much.